Now we're going to look at this particular portion of Victor N. Alexander's downed website, va.com, which we found a way to recover, to bring to all. Jesus Christ, or Yahshua Mashiach, and there it is in the Aramaic. In the ancient Aramaic language, the name of Yahshua, or Jesus, is spelled Yeh, Shin, Wa, Ein. These are 4 consonants. In Aramaic, the vowels are not in the form of letters of the alphabet. The vowels are added by dots and symbols to make pronunciation of the all consonant words possible. In English, the Yeh becomes J, the Shin becomes S, the Wa becomes a U, and the Ein becomes an S. This makes Jesus. But according to English grammar, a vowel has to follow the J, otherwise the name cannot be pronounced properly. So in the transliteration of the name, they added the E after the J, and they ended up with Jesus. Now this might not sound like the same name, but since three of the 4 letters in the name don't have English language equivalents, the English pronunciation had to be modified. Joshua and Jesus are the very same name, in fact, albeit the transliterations are of 2 very different languages, with 4,000 years of divergent evolution, because languages evolve over time, don't they? They have to be modernized for the times. The name of Christ comes from the Greek word for the anointed, or here in the Greek. The English language is based on the Latin, which in turn is based on the Greek. The word Mashiach is the original word for the anointed. Another good choice for Christ is the Messiah, again from Mashiach. This is the same word in all languages, designating Jesus as the Messiah prophesied by the Old Testament. Okay, so he's basically saying there's a similarity between this name Jesus and Joshua, or Ishur in the Aramaic. Now we are going to look at a statement by the translator, Victor N. Alexander. Where is this? Okay, Christian confession. One of the first ideas that Victor N. Alexander had regarding the approach to translating the Bible was to avoid reading the existing Bible translations thoroughly before translating. He did not wish the translations from the Greek or Latin version to influence him. He wanted a fresh impression as much as was possible. He attempted to suppress the wordings and phraseology that had crept into his subconscious. He had to guard against unconscious inclusions of wordings from other translations. Having attended many church services since childhood and his reading of the Bible over the years, which could make his translating a difficult task. One of the mistakes that he made at the very beginning was assuming that the modern Syriac translation of the Peshitta, the Eastern Peshitta, or maybe the Western Peshitta as well, was an authentic work of translating. This misconception set him back about a year and a half. At first the mistake depressed him, but later it turned into an unexpected advantage. He became familiar with the evolution of the Aramaic language. He had already translated the Gospels of Mark and Matthew in that order. Then he had a conversation one day with an old Church of the East priest. He told him, Victor N. Alexander had told this high priest that he had been translating the Bible from the Syriac into English for the sake of sharing the authentic Aramaic Bible with his American friends and English-speaking people. At this time, the high priest did not say very much, except for smiling what Victor N. Alexander thought was approval. At a later meeting, the high priest asked Victor N. Alexander what he was doing. He said that he was still translating the Bible to this high priest. Then the high priest had to tell him. He said, the Syriac is all wrong. Talk about being shocked, for he had just finished translating Matthew and was getting ready to translate John. He had already translated Mark before he met the high priest for the first time. So Victor N. Alexander asked him, wasn't the Syriac translated from the ancient tongue? The Church of the East is an Asherite church, and we do not use the term Aramaic. This is what the high priest told him. This is a modern day designation. So the Church of the East is an Asherite church, and they do not use the term Aramaic. This is a modern designation, Aramaic really evolved from the language of the Asharai, the people of Mesopotamia. Let's have a look at that again, just in case we messed up there. Victor N. Alexander asked him, the high priest, wasn't the Syriac translated from the ancient tongue? For the Church of the East is an Asharai church, and okay, we messed up here somehow. Victor N. Alexander asked him, wasn't the Syriac translated from the ancient tongue? The Church of the East is an Asharai church, and we do not use the term Aramaic. This is a modern day designation. Aramaic really evolved from the language of the Asharai, the people of Mesopotamia. The high priest said, no, the Syriac version was translated by the Protestants and Catholics from the Greek versions. So Victor N. Alexander asked him, still incredulous, you mean no one has translated the ancient tongue original at all? He said no. Then Victor N. Alexander purchased a copy of the official Ancient Church of the East book from the high priest. He began reading Mark and later Matthew, and he was amazed. It was very different, vastly different. It took him, Victor N. Alexander, a while to recover emotionally. He had spent 1.5 years of his life translating the two Gospels from what he thought was the authentic ancient Aramaic transcription into modern Syriac, because he speaks many dialects of the Aramaic and the Syriac, etc., even Norwegian, because his wife's Norwegian. And he found out that he had been translating from a 19th century Syriac translation of what he finally determined was really a Syriac translation of mostly an English version, i.e. King James. This 1897 Syriac version that he had was translated in Urmi, Iran by American and English missionaries who had the KJV, 1611, with the help of proselytized Asharai Christians, those ones that they had convinced, and they left their they dropped their former name Sarai and became Christian, so they converted to the Western Christianity that these missionaries were pushing. Victor N. Alexander studied the work and activities of the missionaries in Urmi from about 1839 to 1914. He made some interesting discoveries. The ancient church of the East being impoverished and its people barely surviving under Islamic oppression of the crumbling Ottoman Empire had allowed the missionaries to enter their villages in North Iran and southern Turkey. They preached to them their modern religions, the Western American-based religion. The missionaries from the West came in and established schools and churches and medical facilities, because this is badly needed. Where opportunity is available, they took advantage of it, because they were struggling to survive. They learned the Syriac Aramaic, these missionaries learned the Syriac Aramaic, the modern version, with vernacular, and wrote up a grammar for the people, because there was no grammar for them, right? So they had to create one. As a result, everyone could now read the Bible, the KJV, in their modern vernacular, which until then only priests of the ancient church of the East knew how to read. The ancient Aramaic scripture had been passed down to them from the apostolic age. Okay, as a result, everyone could now read the Bible in their modern vernacular, okay, which until then only the priests of the ancient church of the East knew how to read. So the Church of the East had retained the ancient Aramaic in their liturgy when celebrating Mass and conducting official church services. The Bible itself was read in the original ancient Aramaic during church services or Mass. The priests explained it to them in their modern Aramaic vernacular through brief sermons. By this date there were no major theologians left. In comparison, the Catholic Church, Roman Catholic Church, has always had priests that knew Latin. The Church of the East priests of this period did not know ancient Aramaic that well. However, the Catholic Latin version was a translation of the Greek, which is itself, by definition, a translation of the words of Jesus Christ spoken in ancient Aramaic. In contrast, the Church of the East at least had the original ancient Aramaic scriptures, hand-copied without any changes from the original tongue, because it was exclusively for them. From the high priests of the Apostolic Church to the people, the mass, who also, being native speakers, understood that language. Judging by the thousands of idioms or expressions that only make complete sense in the Aramaic, there is no doubt as to the origin of the ancient Aramaic New Testament. The ancient Church of the East, ancient Aramaic New Testament, is the original gospel of Jesus Christ, or Yeshua Mashiach. All others are translations. And as Bart Ehrman loves to say, copies of copies of copies of copies of copies of copies of copies, not from original manuscripts. The Church of the East schools during the 19th century were in the hands of a few monks who knew the ancient Aramaic, and they only taught a few students at a time toward the priesthood. The missionaries, and especially the Catholics, brought up the old hand-copied Bibles of the Church of the East. Some of them were in the hands of families and tribal leaders. They were precious for sentimental reasons, but they were not different from the hundreds of copies the ancient Church of the East had then. These were all copied by hand and subsequently printed by modern presses. The only sad thing is the old monks who copied the scriptures by hand on deer skins, there's a spelling mistake there, were also masters of the language, and there are none left today. They knew the ancient idioms or expressions, figures of speech, and expressions. A century ago, these people injected these idioms into the modern Syriac vernacular. Today, most of these idioms are a distant memory because the times and customs have changed. The knowledge of ancient Aramaic in the Christian world is very weak. During the present, or the ecumenical efforts at that time of him writing this, translating, etc., to bridge the gap between the mainstream Christian denominations, the validity of the translation that Victor and Alexander was doing was overshadowed by larger concerns of keeping the faithful united. The modern Church of the East, therefore, has no plans, or had no plans, to translate the ancient Aramaic scriptures at any time, right? Or, at that moment. One could understand their reluctance, since they may have felt that they have it already in the original language, and therefore why translate it? Perhaps it's best that way. It was better that way. So Victor and Alexander decided to carry on his translation independently of all denominations. The ecumenical movement is somewhat responsible for a superficial solidarity among the denominations involved with it. The established churches do not see any need for a new English language translation. As he resumed the work of translation after all those considerations, he decided not to go back and retranslate Mark and Matthew immediately. The old translated verses were still fresh in his mind, and he did not want to fall into the trap of rushing through them and conforming them superficially to the new reading of the ancient Aramaic. He opened up John, started reading the ancient Aramaic of this gospel for the first time, and he was awed by it. He was amazed by it. Here was a clear view of the triune God from the very beginning of the first chapter. The key word was milta, a beautiful word in its theological connotation. Logos, the Greek logos, and word, English word, are such poor substitutes. There is essentially no English translation for the word milta in a theological sense. Therefore, Victor and Alexander had to come up with one. He translated the word milta, or he has translated the word milta as manifestation, the nearest English equivalent. Jesus Christ is God manifest. There is one God. There are three manifestations, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. He translated John and then Luke, and finally he went back to Matthew and started fresh. And at this point he was translating Mark, and he would keep posting his translations on his website until he had all the New Testament done. Then he would start with the Old Testament. He didn't complete it all because he's an older man now and he has medical problems. He's in the hospital, in and out, so he may not finish it. But he says he might not complete the whole Old Testament, but he says if he passed, there's bound to be somebody else that pick up from where he left off and continue it. And that's his statement, May 10, 1998. Okay, and then here's some more details about his Aramaic Bible Translation Project proposal. The following are excerpts from a project proposal that he made in 1995 before he commenced the translation of the New Testament. He hoped that they would shed some light on his approach and qualifications for the work that appeared on his website, va.com. Statement of significance and impact of the project. The purpose of this project is to translate the Bible, or was to translate the Bible from the original Aramaic, the language Jesus spoke, the Galilean Aramaic. In its present translations, the Bible contains thousands of verses which do not rhyme or maintain any appreciable poetic structure, whereas the original Aramaic version is a masterfully written and poetically beautiful work. Besides considerations of style, there are extensive passages in the present English language versions that are translated so poorly from an idiomatic standpoint that the scholar, let alone the layman, that's an ordinary person, everyday Joe, can hardly understand them. And there are two larger issues in the humanities which will benefit by a non-denominational authentic translation of the Bible according to standards of literary excellence. First of all, the major reason for the insistence of Western biblical theologians that Greek was the original language of the gospel can be traced to the original controversies between the Greek converts to Christianity and the founding Jewish Christians. In addition, a Bible translated from Aramaic with total disregard for the influence of the churches will not contain racist connotations. Mostly theologians grinding their own axe have imposed these on it. The second consideration is to expose the influence that the Aramaic language has had on early English, Shakespearean English and subsequent literature and thought because of the place of the Bible in English society throughout the Christian era. Therefore, restoring the Aramaic idioms and poetic construction through a fresh translation from the original Aramaic would likewise benefit American students and scholars of humanities in their renewed appreciation for the language of the Bible. The readership of the Bible, in authentic translation, would be dramatically expanded since people of all cultures and religious backgrounds could read it for purely literary reasons, and students of religion would find it a very profound work of theological thought. For the deeply religious Christian, it would be a breath of fresh air. It definitely is, as passage after passage begins to read with clarity, style and impact. Narrative description. The Bible has been translated into hundreds of languages. A new translation and the intellectual significance of the project is based on the literary consideration of providing a truly authentic translation of scriptures. He's talking about the original Aramaic, the Old Testament and the New. Utilising the know-how of literary styles and poetic structures of the two languages, the original Aramaic that Jesus spoke, Galilean Aramaic, and modern American English. The value of an idiomatic translation to scholars and general readers is an obvious one. We, or the Americans, know more than any other nation how foreigners and new immigrants introduce their own idioms, expressions in the efforts to communicate with us, and how sometimes unintended humour is the result. More significantly, total misunderstandings emerge out of the introduction of incompatible foreign idioms into English. In addition to this, when it comes to Aramaic, there are many letters with phonetic sounds that simply do not exist in English, and there is no really effective way in even approximating the sounds. Literally hundreds of significant words have been translated in error. In fact, in the case of translating the Bible, without going into literary pages and pages of examples to prove this point, he asked people to allow him to state very simply that there is no other way to translate the Bible from the original Aramaic unless the translator knows the languages involved fluently. If you go to a seminary or you go to some sort of college and you learn the modern Aramaic, well, it doesn't mean you're fluent in it, right? You're just well versed in it. Okay? Practiced in it. You don't know it fluently, naturally. You weren't taught it as a child, right? From Aramaic speaking parents. As for idiomatic speech, the translator should have a strong feeling for the tone, texture and mood of the words, phrases, idioms, expressions and figures of speech. Yeah, because there's people out there who say that Victor N. Alexander, or one in particular, is translating from the Eastern Peshitta. Rubbish. Because he found a way, because the original Aramaic, Tab Eshret, Nishan Artika Sapray, etc., is long dead. It's a long dead language. So he found a way to revive that by using the root words of the modern vernacular. So he's translating from that Tab Eshret, not the Eastern Peshitta. Okay? These are from people who learnt it somewhere, right? And they think, oh, they know it better than him. As for idiomatic speech, the translator should have a strong feel for the tone, texture and mood of the words, phrases, idioms, expressions and figures of speech. Aramaic comes down from the earliest of times. The first writings were in pictographic form, same as the Hebrew. Then cuneiform, because they're sister languages, right? Aramaic, Hebrew. Then cuneiform and alphabetic through to the first literature and the recording of myths and legends of Mesopotamia. It is a very rich language with profound twists and turns of expression, richly poetic, complex, exacting, and flexible all at once. It is paradoxical, ironic, and full of hyperbole, and yet ideal for presenting profound ideas. In that sense, hyperbole, we read somewhere years ago that the Eastern people know, it doesn't sound right. If it's a lie, well, we still believe it anyway, It's just one of those things that these Eastern people do. Hyperbole, like hype, sounds too good to be true. It doesn't make sense, something like that, but to them, it does. Yeah, it's kind of weird.